On a day when much attention is focused on the Senate, some surprising news also came in from the finance minister. Today, Jim Flaherty tabled a budget bill that drew a swift and angry response from the Public Service Alliance of Canada. The union called the second bill to implement last spring's budget a far-reaching attack on public service workers and the unions that represent them. Let's take a look at some of the highlights of today's bill. One, it amends the Supreme Court Act related to the appointment of justices. It's not clear at this point if the changes would be retroactive to affect the controversial recent appointment of Justice Marc Nadon to the High Court. He's not sitting on any judgment as he's being challenged whether he should be allowed to. It also makes it illegal for public servants declared essential services to strike. It will be up to the government to decide what those essential services are. It changes the definition of passport in the criminal code. It gives the minister more powers under the Immigration and Refugee Act, and that's just a few things. So is the government declaring war on unions as the PSAC union complains? Will the changes on the Supreme Court justice appointments be an effective workaround for the Marc Nadon dilemma? And why are these non-monetary measures included in the budget implementation bill anyway? Let's find out. Joining me now, the Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Finance, Andrew Saxton, with him Peggy Nash, NDP finance critic, and the Liberal finance critic, Scott Brison. All right, on the right to strike, Mr. Saxton, here's the key section of the budget bill so folks understand it. It says, quote, in those cases where 80% or more of the positions in a bargaining unit are considered necessary for providing an essential service, the dispute resolution mechanism is to be arbitration. The employer has the exclusive right to determine that a service is essential and the number of positions that will be required to provide that service. Why did the government deem this necessary, and does it give too much power to the government to decide what's essential?
Well, Evan, obviously there are services in our government that are absolutely essential for the public to receive, and therefore it has to be something that the government decides what is essential, what is not, and the public service will have the opportunity to go to binding arbitration to resolve any disputes in that regard. Okay,
but does that essentially take away the right to strike and to collective bargain from the Public Service Alliance of Canada?
For essential services, those services deemed essential by the government, yes.
Okay, but how flexible is the definition of essential? That's the question.
Well, look, Evan, obviously in our society, in all societies, there are essential services that the public has to receive. And that's something that the government decides what is essential. And therefore, if they are essential services, they will not have the ability to strike. They will have the ability to go to binding arbitration to resolve disputes.
You realize, I mean, I know we're going into some kind of circle here, but the question is who defines what's essential? I know the government does, but let me just put this to Peggy Nash. What do you think about that? The government wants to protect essential services. What's your take on it?
Well, this is a government that doesn't like to consult with people. It's a government that doesn't like to discuss or negotiate. So it's not surprising that they would not want to be in a situation where they have to come to a negotiated solution with government employees, and that makes taking away the right to strike very appealing to them. But I think that's wrong. I think negotiated settlements are a better solution to differences of opinion.
But even in the case of essential services, Peggy?
No, clearly, where you have genuine essential services, for example, in emergency services, I mean, no one wants ambulance drivers or firefighters going out on strike and a loss of life. So you need a clear definition that makes sense for essential services. But Evan, what I do have to say is, once again, we have the government who's obviously failed to learn their lesson. They've bundled this and so many other changes into another massive omnibus budget bill, more than 300 pages. And clearly they think Supreme Court nominations, labor laws, health and safety, scientists, the Research Council, these are all budget measures. According to the government, it is ridiculous. If they have the conviction of their beliefs, they should introduce these as separate bills, give them adequate time for debate instead of rushing them through in an omnibus budget bill.
Scott Brison, what's your take on this?
Well, almost 30% of this Budget Implementation Act is devoted to overhauling labour relations within the federal public service. First of all, that should be studied and voted on in a separate committee in a standalone piece of legislation. It should not be in a Budget Implementation Act. But secondly, to basically give the government this kind of power to deny the rights of public service workers to strike will lead to binding arbitration type decisions to resolve any conflict. And frankly, binding arbitration often leads to settlements that are quite expensive for the employers. So it doesn't actually save money. And I think the government is actually trying to pick a fight with the public service unions. They're going back and they've got Clement and Flaherty and Baird, the three henchmen of the Mike Harris days in Ontario, who actually have this experience, and it may have been a good experience for them from a partisan perspective, but it was bad for the people of Ontario. It ground the public service to a halt, created huge economic challenges in Ontario, was not good for the Ontario economy, but I think the government is picking a fight to try to distract Canadians from the scandal of the Duffy and the PMO malfeasance. I think they want to fight over this.
All right. Mr. Saxon, what's your take on this? The government is obviously facing a lot of questions about the Senate issue. Is this, the surprises put in this budget implementation bill for unions, is this going to be a big fight with the unions over this?
The vast majority of this Budget Implementation Act is dealing with technical measures left over that haven't yet been introduced since the budget was presented in March of 2013. There are a few other items that we've already discussed that were not mentioned in Budget 2013, but the vast majority are just technical issues from Budget 2013. I should also point out that those public servants that are in non-essential services will still retain all the rights that they had previously. This is strictly dealing with essential services.